Hello, and welcome to another episode of Undiscovered Beasts and Strange Phenomena. Please join our experienced and knowledgeable panel of hosts as we explore the great mysteries of our time: Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts, and unexplained phenomena.
Hello, and welcome to Swamp Shadows, Tales from the Tupelos. I'm your host, Mike Richburg. Thank you for joining me. Tonight's episode will be about the Rimini Goat Thief. Won't you please come have a seat down by the fire over here with me, and let's talk about the Rimini Goat Thief and what it might have been. It was really something at the time. Around 1970, some strange occurrences were going on in Rimini, or near Rimini, South Carolina. And I know a lot of you are saying, isn't that Rimini, like in Rimini, Italy? Well, in Italy, that's Rimini, but in South Carolina, there ain't no E on the end of that thing. So it's the I, and we're proud of it, so we make it a long I. It's Rimini. Rimini lies just north Lake Marion, east and north of Lake Marion, South Carolina, kind of in the center part of the state, down in the low country a little ways there. Very rural area, lots of woods, lots of farming, not a whole lot of anything else going on there. I was a young child of about 6 or 7. We were staying, my family that is, was staying the summer at a house in Lake Marion, which I thought was really cool, to get to be on the lake and go fishing and swimming and stuff like that. That was a really cool thing for me. But the Rimini Goat Thief kind of cramped my style a little bit. You see, when this thing happened, the people in the area were so fearful, you could no longer... the children wasn't running around after dark anymore. And when they went outside, it was in broad daylight, and they went out in the middle of the yard where the folks could see them out there and stuff like that. Because whatever this thing was that was taking goats, it could take a youngin' too. You see, the first time I ever heard about the Rimini Goat Thief was I had a habit. As a child, I didn't always go to sleep. When I was told to go to bed, I couldn't sleep for whatever reason. My mind was racing, thinking about stuff, whatever. So I would get up, and the grown folks, of course, would be out on the porch in the summertime there. And most of the time, the windows would be open in the house, so you could hear what they were saying. So I would sneak in there and kind of sit on the couch in the living room where I could hear the grown folks out on the porch talking. They'd sit out there and smoke cigars and drink whiskey and talk about all that stuff they didn't talk about around the kids or whatever, and do their thing. Well, one night they was all in a commotion out there. They was all in a hussy about the Rimini Goat Thief, and that struck me as very, fascinating. What was this they was talking about, Well, I was listening carefully what they was talking about, but I didn't hear the whole conversation because I was missing a lot of pieces, but I knew something was going on, and it was taking goats, and it had them perplexed. They couldn't figure out, wrap their brain around what was going on. And they was talking about this article in the paper and everything. Well, the next day, I confronted my mama about it. And because what had happened was, I was going out to play, and she said, well, hey, just hang around in the yard there or whatever. Don't go be bopping down through the woods or something like you might normally do. Just hang around the house. That's cool. I was like, okay, well. So I kind of asked about it. And my mama didn't read the article to me, but she paraphrased, because we got around the time. I straight up asked her about, was there an article in the paper? And because I was nosy that way, or a curious little fella. So she was honest with me and paraphrased what was in the article. Basically, she didn't read it. But what was going on was this man, this farmer there in the area, had goats in a goat pen, like most folks would keep goats. And goats had got to going missing. And that's all fine and dandy and everything until it keeps happening over and over again. And then, it kind of becomes odd. One missing goat's one thing, but if you got a bunch of missing goats over time, that's something else going on there. And it was strange. It seems the farmer could never find any track of people coming in there or a big animal coming in there, maybe taking the goat from the pen somehow or something like that. It's very odd. So he had enlisted the help of several hunters and trackers and things like that from the area, townsfolk or whatever. It kind of got to be big news, so the paper picked it up and ran an article on it, wondering, what could take goats from a pen like that and not leave a track. And I remember that was a sticking point that was really with the adults. And that was, and again, I was a very small child, so I have my perspective and the way I interpret the adults, what they might have been, their perspective at the time, the best I could. But I knew that was a sticking point because that was a curiosity, how something could go anywhere without leaving a track, much less go somewhere in a goat pen and remove a goat and then leave with the goat and still not leave a track. Well, that was all one thing. But then the same farmer had went and put another run of fence up on top of the fence that was already there. In other words, he doubled the height of his fence. Now, I don't remember the exact footage, and I don't want to say a number because it might be wrong. But however tall the fence was, he made it twice as tall, all right? More than enough to keep the average critter from going in or out of the pen or anything like that. And then, you see, that didn't stop the occurrences, though. And that further confused and perplexed the town folk. Like, well, my goodness, it's one thing because, people in the back of their mind, even though they wouldn't find no tracks, a lot of people was thinking it was some kind of big cat, like maybe a puma or panther or something, or a cougar, whatever you want to call it, some kind of large cat maybe in the area. But how could even a large cat like that go over such a tall fence and still yet there's no tracks anywhere? They never found no tracks. And that really had everybody scratching their head. And, of course, people was fearful. If it could take a goat, a grown billy goat out of a pen, it's probably a pretty strong animal or whatever, and a small youngin might not put up much of a fight. So I didn't get to run around and play too much that summer, like I say, like I might normally would have, on account of my mama and all the other parents was quite fearful for the children because they didn't really know what was going on. There was not a lot of people in the area. There's a lot more now than there was around, I say again, about 1970. I've tried to isolate the exact time by verifying the account by finding the newspaper articles. And I believe there was more than one article. And I'm quite sure there was. But I don't know what newspaper it was. It could have very well been the Sumter Daily Item or whatever it was called at the time, or the Charleston newspaper with Post and Courier or whatever it was called at the time, or any number of other smaller newspapers from the low country down there. And I've not, to this day, ever found the article or what newspaper that those articles might have been in. That would be a valuable asset, research-wise, obviously. That would be very important. And I've unfortunately not been able to do that. And in some cases, some of the records haven't been kept, and I don't know the exact year or things like that. So it's a very difficult search. But nonetheless, the articles were there. And, back in the day like that, the newspaper was kind of, there wasn't an internet. You didn't go, on Facebook or what have you, or click on newschannel.com or what have you and get your news. It come from your neighbor or it come from the newspaper or the TV. So, anyways, it was a big deal. People was afraid, and they didn't understand what was going on. How could this thing, prowl the countryside undetected and just take the goat whenever it wanted to, not leave a track or whatever? And while most of the activity was centered around this one farmer and his goats, and I do not know the farmer's name, there was cases at the same time in the area that also might have fell into that category, such as another person had a goat missing and there were some pets missing and things like that. So there was a pattern of missing animals in the immediate area there, just to the east and north of Lake Marion at that time. And it was a curious matter, and one that I was very intrigued by. I believe it was the first time I can ever remember hearing about some kind of mysterious creature or something like that unexplained in the woods. And I found that extremely curious and fascinating. The event, or series of events, eventually subsided, and that was kind of that, It just kind of went away. And I don't know if maybe there was more activity in the area at the time that we didn't hear about, of course, that didn't make it in the newspaper and things like that. But the activity seemed to just dissipate, and folks eventually just kind of quit talking about it. Instead of every day, all day long, everybody talking about Rimini Goat Thief, Rimini Goat Thief, this, that, and the other. Folks just kind of quit talking about it because the activity stopped, and that was that. And I didn't think too much more about it. I always thought it was a curiosity as I was growing up. It was in the back of my mind. It was a very curious thing, and I do like that sort of thing. I never could really figure out a theory on what it could have been. That is, until one time I saw something very strange. And not long after that, it all kind of clicked with me. I'm going to explain. In the summer of 1989, I was driving my pickup truck on U.S. Highway 21 South, about first light. I wasn't far from the Combahee River, just north of I-95, actually, up above the town of Yemassee, South Carolina, heading to one of my favorite camping spots. There was two people in the truck with me. I came around a bend in the road and started down a long straightaway. There wasn't much around at the time there, especially in 1989, just mostly woods. There was a few, scarce homes here and there, a few fields. There was agriculture in the area. There's a lot more homes and agriculture in the area now. There's a lot more woods back then. And as I turned to go down this straightaway, that's how it was, woods on both sides. It's a long, straight piece of road. But way down at the other end of the straightaway down there in the road, I could see the white tails of deer bouncing around. It was way up there. But I could tell what it was. If you ever, seen deer many times cross the road or hunting and that type of thing, when they get a white-tailed deer, when they get alerted or take off sprinting or something spooks them, whatever, they throw that white tail up there often, and, you can see that white a good ways off, even at first light, So I could see these little white deer tails bouncing around up the road up there. I said, there's a herd of deer crossing the road, and maybe, a car done hit one or something, because they all, looks like they spooked. I see all them tails bouncing. So I'm running, about 55 miles an hour, probably. Wasn't going too fast, because there's deer all in there. I didn't want a deer to run out in front of me and, hit a deer, so I wasn't, going faster. So I'm closing in on where these deer are at in the road, and they scattered and everything, and I see something in the road. a curious-looking thing. It's big, whatever it is. I said, first thought, well, it's like, it's too big to be a dog, you know, even a Great Dane or something. I couldn't understand what I was looking at. And whatever, because it kind of like it was facing away from me or something. And I said, well, maybe it's a person with a big coat on as I got closer, you know. It was in my lane, and I'm cruising right along, so I'm gaining on it. It's just standing there. And then I said, well, you know what? That's too big to be a person, too, as I got closer to it. And I couldn't quite make out, you know, what I was seeing. And then it almost looked like, well, I said, that thing looks kind of like a horse standing there, the rear end of a horse with a cape or a tarp draped over it or something. And then I was at the point where I was already having to slow down because whatever it was, I didn't want to run into it. I didn't want to hit it with my truck, you know. So I just started slowing down. And then the thing looked up at me, and I realized what I was looking at. It was a bird of enormous proportion, a bird as tall as a man, but thicker than a man, than the average man. This bird looked up and looked basically straight at me as I was slowing down so I wouldn't strike it. I realized it was standing on a small deer in the road. At that time, I started screaming. I started shaking the other two people in the bench seat of the truck. Now, this is funny. I started shaking them and screaming, look at the bird, look at the bird. I probably screamed, look at the bird 100 times over the next 2 minutes. Because it just absolutely blew my mind. I wanted the other people there to make sure they saw it because I don't want to be the only person that sees this. Okay. So I was like shaking the guy next to me and the other person all at the same time, just screaming, look at the bird, waking them up. This bird opened its wings up. Well, it kind of like kicked his wings halfway up and then opened all the way. It kind of like cocked his wings up a little bit and hopped around 180 degrees on the deer. It just kind of hopped around where its back was to me, but it was still standing on the deer. Then it opened its wings all the way up and took off with that deer. Now, it wasn't a grown deer, but a deer's a deer, still a young deer. It was one of them young coastal deer down there that don't get very big, and it was not a very big deer at all. Something on the magnitude of 40 or 50 pounds because it was not a fawn, but it wasn't long from being one. All right, and it was a small deer. You know, them deer don't get very big down there at the coast anyway. All right, so it takes off with a deer. The whole time, I'm stopping the truck from hitting it and shaking the people, screaming, look at the bird, look at the bird, look at the bird. So it was probably quite the scene. I'm sure I looked like a complete maniac. I was losing my mind because I'd never seen a bird so big in my life. When that bird opens it opened its wings up to take off, to take flight. One wingtip was over the center line of Highway 21, and one wingtip was over the grass on the side of the road. Now, I never did measure U.S. Highway 21 right there, just a few miles above I-95. But you can imagine it's a standard-sized U.S. highway, you know, about how big that is. I can honestly say the wings was like the size of sheets of plywood, literally. Tremendous bird, way bigger than an eagle. Now, I know a lot of people say, oh, well, the lighting wasn't good. Maybe you just saw a big eagle. Oh, I did, because it looked just like a golden eagle almost to me, to an amateur observer like myself. But it was so big. And I know I didn't misjudge the size for a couple different reasons. One, the wingtip, from wingtip to wingtip, did cover the whole lane and then some. Plus, it took off with a deer. Now, albeit probably a 50-pound deer at most. But still, yeah, if you do the math, it takes a tremendously powerful, large bird to take off flying with 50 pounds of weight. Large birds, well, most birds, are powerful animals, but you have to realize, too, they're not very heavy because of their structure. You know, they're made to fly. So when they pick up weight, it takes a lot of bird to move a little bit of weight, in other words. So for a bird to pick up a 50-pound animal, it has to be pretty massive. The other people saw it, too. And my buddy was sitting next to me. He later compared the size analogy he made was it was not unlike a hang glider with a man hang. That's how big it was when it took off. It took it 3 cycles of its wings to pick that bird up and completely get up over the tall trees of an old-growth forest, hardwood forest, in the river bottom there. Big old oak trees and stuff. It only took it 3 cycles of its wings to get up over them oak trees and head to the east. I never came to a complete stop, but of course I had to slow down to keep from hitting it. It shook me up. I later pulled off. Later on down the road a little ways, I don't know, a mile or so, I pulled off where there was a cement block building at a crossroad. Not a crossroad, like a T in the road, where side road connected. I just pulled off the road there just to kind of regain my composure because it was just so odd to see such a tremendous bird. Now, it didn't strike me right then, that day. I wasn't thinking about Rimini Goat Thief that day. But later on, at some point in time, shortly after that, it occurred to me that there is one thing that can take a goat, a grown goat, from a pen and not leave a track or any other sign of its visit there. And it's a big bird like that. That was a big connect the dot moment for me. It took this lifelong enigma that I carried with me for all those years about, the goat thief and what it might have been, that curiosity. And it kind of tied with that when I saw that sighting of that giant eagle is what I refer to it as, because that's what it looked like. It was not like a thunderbird in the traditional sense, as far as a condor type bird. This was very much a bird of prey, like an eagle, a raptor. But that was a big moment for me because it all clicked right in there. And sure enough, similar phenomena would later occur with missing goats and stuff, and we're going to get into that for a minute. There was about a decade shortly after that. Well, starting in 1996 through 2005, there was a cluster of activity to the east of where we saw this big bird in 1989. Now, that cluster of activity was the same type of thing. Missing goats. In 1996 in Jacksonboro, in 2001 in Ridgeville, 2004 in Walterboro, and in 2005 near Green Pond, South Carolina. Just off the Donnelly Wildlife Management area. The same type of activity or something similar to that. So to make a case for this large bird eating goats, maybe, okay, is that what's going on here? Well, I like to find precedents for things. For one, is there a precedent for what I even saw? As I mentioned, it wasn't like the traditional thunderbird in the sense of something that looked like a condor that might, be out there riding thermals or whatever. This was very much an eagle, what I saw, or very similar. There are a few candidates that kind of get close to what I saw. As far as if you're looking for a precedent, like what what is it like? What did I see? What is there out there that's like that? Or what has there been out there like that? A few thousand years back, the Haast eagle of New Zealand would have been a pretty good candidate. But still yet, it wasn't really big enough. And that's separated by thousands of miles, no less, and in thousands of years. That was maybe a bit of a stretch to try to connect that. But it's a good candidate. So it's not like there hasn't been birds like that before. Again, the Haast eagle, and that's H-A-A, 2 A's, S-T-S, Haasts, was a very, very large eagle and certainly would be capable of taking a goat, perhaps. But there again, thousands of miles and thousands of years, that's a tough one to connect the dots on. The typical thunderbird sightings, and believe me, I have really looked at a lot of big bird sightings trying to find some or those that are like or similar to the morphology of what I saw. Most of them, however, are like the typical thunderbird sighting, which is a large, typically black bird with perhaps a ring around its neck, not unlike a condor in appearance sometimes, that type of thing. And there are certainly well-documented cases of thunderbird-type animals or avian trying to take children. That's not unheard of. And, of course, that's a very persistent Native American legend as well. It's been around for, we don't know how long, but certainly for a very, very long time. There is some precedent for large birds in the area. But there again, the morphology is not a good match. So if you look at the Haast eagle, the morphology is kind of a good match, but, it's not really, it's not feasible to think that an animal from the other side of the earth from 1,000 years ago could still be here. It's possible, but it's not, I shouldn't say it's not feasible. It's not practical to try to make that assumption. I would have to say that if there was any one solid good match, it would be an animal described by none other than John James Audubon himself, called the Washington's eagle. Now, the peculiar story of the Washington's eagle is a curiosity in its own. And I know that, I would look at it this way. I would think that John James Audubon would be one person that would know a little something about birds. And if he saw one, he would kind of know what the skinny was on it. He knows we're in from a hole in the ground when it comes to birds. If anybody, would probably know, it would be this guy, right? Well, that's not the case, apparently, according to many. You see, in 1814, John James Audubon was on a trip up the Mississippi River with a Canadian fur trader that had come down from the Great Lakes. And they spotted, it's the first time he claims he spotted this tremendous, absolutely ginormous, noble bird, he called it. He said he would never forget and the delight it gave him to see this bird because he knew it was something special. As a naturalist and artist, somebody that cataloged, I don't know how many, species, something on the order of a couple dozen species at least. He kind of knew what he was seeing was special. Well, he again saw this Washington's eagle, as he called it. A few years later, he was in Kentucky when he saw one that had apparently been feeding on a hog slaughter, like they had slaughtered a hog. And this giant eagle got up, like spooked it, and it got up from the kill or something like that, or where, you know, the remains, maybe some entrails had been placed or something like that. And it flew up into a low-hanging tree. A low-hanging tree branch. Well, they took the specimen, and of course they measured it and cataloged it carefully. He measured the wingspan at over 10 feet. He made a couple of very notable comments about the size of the animal. And one thing that really stuck out to me about his description is he described the eagle's morphology or appearance. One thing he mentioned was a uniform scaling on the tarsi, or the lower part of the leg. I noticed this when I saw that great giant eagle that day in 1989 near the Combahee River on my way to go camping. When we saw it, that's one thing I noticed, was the unusual scaling on the leg. It almost looked segmented like a pineapple or like a palmetto tree that sheds its fronds, and you know it leaves that pattern, just segmented look, somewhat like that. It was very, pronounced scaling. And when I saw that in the description of John James Audubon's own description, that is of Falco washingtoni, or Washington's eagle, or the bird of Washington, in honor of the first president of the United States. That really jumped out at me, that pronounced scaling. Because that was one thing that I noticed during all of the things that I could have noticed, and I did notice a lot. I got a pretty good look at this thing. I had to stop almost to keep from hitting it. And it looked me straight in the face. But that pronounced scaling, that really jumped out at me when I heard that description. Now, given 10 feet is not something on the order of maybe 16 feet like I saw, but you're starting to get pretty close now. You got a bird that fits the same description, brown in color, not unlike a golden eagle or an immature bald eagle to some degree. Pronounced scaling and tremendous size. All right, so there's a lot of things that check the list right there. So I would say that's your number one candidate. However, very odd thing about Washington's eagle. Some people claim that John James Audubon didn't know a thing about a bird, and that he must have somehow miscalculated the measurements of the animal, or something to that effect. Now, mind you, once Audubon described this species, many other subsequent sightings of the same animal were published in scientific journals of the time. However, some segment of the community, of the scientific community at the time, had a problem with Audubon. In one way, they thought it might be appropriate to get back at him, or, seek their revenge, or whatever it might be they had a problem about, was to discredit Washington's eagle. To the point that even shortly after Audubon's passing, that the actual, and I want to make sure I get it, the journal American Naturalist called Washington eagle a ballad species only among amateur ornithologists, and claimed, like many others have, that the bird was mistakenly of a bald eagle, that Audubon didn't know a bald eagle when he saw one, or that it was just a hoax or publicity stunt. Now, I'm not a very smart man, but I don't think that I would be one to question John Audubon's knowledge when it came to bird species of all things. Now, he might not know how to change spark plugs in the tractor, I don't know. But that's one fellow that ought to know a bird when he sees one. It ought to know a new one in order to be able to measure one and whatnot. Now, I don't know why these people had a problem with Audubon and what this campaign of discreditation was all about. But I can assure you, in my own amateur opinion, John James Audubon knew what he was looking at when he described that species. And it sounds an awful lot like exactly what I've seen, just not quite as big. The case for a big bird like that, a lot of people say, well, how can a bird like that be around, like in South Carolina, and not be seen? Well, maybe it gets seen sometimes. If you saw a bird way up in the sky like that, would you know it was that big? It depends on how high it was, right? I mean, often when you look up in the sky, there's no other point of reference. So, I mean, is that a golden eagle at 3,000 feet, or is that Washington's eagle at 10,000 feet? I mean, you kind of don't know sometimes because it's so hard to tell. You rely solely on your depth perception, and there's no reference for scale. So you don't know if it's as big as a kite or as big as an airplane. And that's just the reality of it sometimes. Sometimes this stuff, you can kind of tell, but it can really trick you easy. So maybe we're seeing these birds, and we don't even know we're seeing these birds, right? Furthermore, maybe, this bird doesn't live like a thunderbird at all. Maybe it's not out there catching thermal currents and soaring to the heavens like a typical condor or other bird like that might, like a lot of birds do. Maybe it's possible that this bird lives down in the canopy, much like a Philippine eagle. Just lives in the trees. Just really good at living in the trees. And that bird had an unusual pattern. It almost looked like digital camo on it. It was a dark-colored bird, but it had these white splotches in odd places, like where the feathers, were. The markings on the feather, where they fell. It was almost like digital camo before there was a digital camo. I actually, me and a buddy of mine painted a sheet of plywood like that. The same camo pattern, because I was kind of into camo patterns at the time and stuff like that. I just thought it was cool. I was just messing around. I had some brown spray paint and some white paint, so we painted a sheet of plywood like the underside of that bird's wings. Then we stuck it up in trees and done all kinds of stuff with it. When I stuck it up in a hardwood tree, it finally disappeared. The white looked just like the sunlight coming through the leaves in the trees. And it dawned on me, this thing could sit up on a limb on a hardwood tree. Even if its wings were open, you might not even see it, because those white splotches in the wing emulate or duplicate the effect of light coming through the leaves. It wouldn't be particularly noticeable. unless you were paying a lot of attention and looking up, most of all. It's a fascinating story. As I said earlier, there was also a cluster of activity of similar things, goats missing and whatnot. 1996 in Jacksonburg, it's the same thing. It's missing goats, no tracks. No tracks whatsoever. Could never figure out what was going on. 2001 in Ridgeville, same thing. Mr. Weber having a lot of trouble with goats missing. Could never find a track of any kind of large predator or anything like that. 2 hunters nearby found a goat wedged up in a tree, like between the tree limb and the trunk of the tree, about 30 some odd feet off the ground, not far from Mr. Weber's farm there. I talked to one of the hunters, a Mr. Wanamaker, a Derek Wanamaker. He described in great detail what they found. I was never able to go to the location. That's what I was ultimately trying to angle at. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. But it's fascinating. Even around that tree where that goat was, no tracks. Because that's what my main thing I asked Wanamaker about was, well, what kind of tracks did you see? You know, you're a hunter. What? Because like a big puma, if an eastern cougar or somehow was there or something like that, it would probably leave them tracks on some level. And if you were keen enough, you might be able to spot track. No tracks. No tracks. 2004, Walterboro. Same thing. Farmer missing goats. No tracks around, just goats missing. Odd enough, right? Well, he did find a pile of bones around a tree on the backside of his property. He owned quite a bit of land. There were bits of hide and bones from goats at the base of a tree. Now, that's not conclusive, but that's a very odd clue right there. Very strange. Something maybe had goats up in the tree. Maybe. Don't know. A lot of things like that, you know, it's just inconclusive, but it's a clue. In 2005 in Green Pond, the same thing again. Goats missing, and goats missing. No tracks. Recurring theme there. There's your pattern. Missing goats, no tracks. The same pattern. Same pattern in all those places, which are all within 20 minutes of each other, down in the South Carolina low country. All within 30 minutes or no more than an hour from Rimini, the area where the Rimini Goat Thief spurred my interest in all this to start with. And just east of where I had my sighting of the big bird, just above Yemassee in 1989. So, I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff out there, but follow me here. One thing can go in a pen and take a goat and come back out of that pen with that goat. Even when you double the height of the fence or the pen, it would have to fly. Because if it walks, it leaves a track. Right? The tale of the Rimini Goat Thief is probably the tale of a big bird. And it's probably the same kind of bird I saw and the people that was with me saw, the two other people. And it's probably the same bird that John James Audubon cataloged and then later was discredited by haters. Okay. Washington's eagle. So I postulate or propose to you that Washington's eagle are a similar avian is the Rimini Goat Thief. Still cause for concern. Even when you take the mysterious atmosphere away from this and you lift this shroud of unknown and you identify this, my mama was still right not to let me run them woods. Because whether you a Washington's eagle eating a deer, a Philippine eagle eating a monkey, or what, goats and people ain't that different than deer and monkeys. And we all part of the food chain. And that's reality. Thank you for joining me on Swamp Shadows, Tales from the Tupelos. Please join me next time. Thank you and good night. Thank you.